You've just found me hiding in the video game Assassin's Creed Mirage. You've just found me hiding in the video game Ghost of Tsushima. Hiding in the video game Sekiro, in the video game Twice, Batman Arkham Sniper Knight, Elite, Middle Earth, Shadow of Mordor, The Last of Us Part 2, As you can see, I'm in a bit of a tight spot. It appears as though for the moment at least I'm out of sight. But I don't know, maybe I should head out there and take a few of these guys down. Alternatively, I could chuck around some inanimate objects to create a distraction and avoid them completely.
These are actually lessons learned over decades of gaming, aspects of stealth that feel so deeply embedded in our expectations that they fall into this category known as video game logic. It's that weird middle ground between, well, that's just ridiculous and, okay, sure, I can believe it.
In fact, these systems are so deep-rooted that if an NPC suddenly showed even a shred of self-preservation, I would genuinely expect half the player base to complain that the game was being unfair.
Alright, in the clear.
As is the case with most systems in video games, developers have to walk an incredibly fine line when it comes to balancing stealth mechanics. They need to be subtle enough to feel natural, but unmistakable enough to avoid being misunderstood. Some of the most basic stealth mechanics feel like they could probably write themselves. Take an enemy's line of sight for instance. We all have an instinctive understanding of how our vision works, it's one of the first things we learned as infants. But replicating how the human eye works isn't as simple as simulating exactly what we see in real life. If it was, then the vast majority of games would be virtually unplayable. Developers are well aware of this dilemma, and they've been handling it by bending the rules of how our vision works to a point where any level of scrutiny quickly uncovers the somewhat amusing liberties that are frequently made. I mean, if we just take a handful of stealth scenarios and shift the perspective a little, then, well, I don't really know what's more embarrassing, the fact that these enemies don't see us, or that we still think this counts as hiding. But let's push that to the back of our minds for the time being. It's not like we can tell Deacon to specifically lower his head just a few inches. So we'll just suspend disbelief and accept that this is just part of the video game logic. We'll just tell ourselves that, yeah, we are in fact hidden.
This is actually a perfect example of one of those weird concessions that video games are pretty much forced to make, short of building a system that allows us to control each individual limb independently.
Yeah, this isn't really a viable option for games that hinge on fast-paced action.
And it's this action where we find ourselves next. After all, sneaking around in the shadows is only one dimension to stealth. Because, of course, why hide when you can perform a takedown? Silently.
If hiding pushes the limits of believability, the silent takedown absolutely annihilates it. Once again, we need to apply a certain level of appreciation for developers designing a mechanic that bridges the gap between what is fundamentally absurd and what feels satisfying to play. Pair this with the fact that if we truly performed a silent takedown, the whole experience would feel, well, just a little bit flat. I'm of course not advocating that we always need to have visceral sound effects to perfect the player experience, but some form of diegetic sound really lends itself towards building tension and suspense. But ultimately this leads to the silent takedown straddling this fairly awkward line that really complicates player immersion. On the one hand, we have what is, for all intents and purposes, the dispatching of an enemy with an impressively low decibel count. On the other hand, we have what might as well be us setting off a fireworks display beside their colleague, only for them not to even take a quick glance.
Keep looking.
Okay, but surely this falls into the category of concessions that we're just willing to accept. The understanding that this is just the application of video game logic. We are prepared just to suspend disbelief. Right?
Well, maybe we need to address the fact that stealth has become heavily homogenized over the last 20 or so years. It almost appears as though nearly every major release needs to tack on some kind of stealth mechanic to bolster gameplay variability, helping to sell the idea of play however you want. But however you want had better strictly fall within the variables of go loud or go quiet. But no, it would be unfair for me to tar every game with the same brush. There are of course some titles that have attempted to push stealth beyond its most basic moving parts. The Last of Us Part 2 built a system where dogs can track Ellie's scent, and honestly, while certainly not flawless in its execution, the enemy AI is generally a step above the rest. There's the Sniper Elite franchise, which has continued to use its audio masking system, allowing for the sound of gunfire to be concealed by other nearby events. Even Ghost Recon Breakpoint, for all its blatant shortcuts that undermine its milsim heritage, it added interactable environments for advanced levels of camouflage that had the potential to create some very high tension moments. In all fairness, we've seen some titles truly attempt to deliver entirely new ways to experience stealth, incorporating most of the ideas that we would expect to see, while also introducing new ones. With all of this partnered with some intricate AI design and, well, I could begin to question my whole thesis. But these games, or even just the mechanics that they possess, are definitely exceptions to what has quickly become the trend. I mentioned in my video covering skill trees that standardized game design can stifle innovation. I get the sense that most of you would agree that developers have a certain habit of taking a successful game mechanic and beating the living shit out of it. What was once a novel idea soon becomes derivative and generic. You can barely turn a corner these days without being confronted with an instant kill animation being at the tips of your fingers. Sure, it can fulfill the power fantasy that many of us may be after, but frankly the player engagement is as much a casualty as this poor sap now lying dead on the pavement. So we're now at a stage where we have countless heroes crouched in fauna, or half hidden behind waist-high geometry, only to leap out, dispatch an enemy with a single press of a button, all at a volume that absolutely shouldn't work no matter how you spin it.
Now, we've already agreed that we can accept concessions, we can understand its video game logic, we can suspend disbelief, but at what point are we going to admit that all of this stealth is beginning to feel a little too familiar?
Maybe I'm being a little unfair. The application of stealth is heavily contingent on the idea of danger. Quietly taking out an enemy is a natural byproduct of this type of encounter. I mean, what else could a player possibly do? What is the alternative? Well, that would be to toss an item in any direction we please and laugh as the guard with 2 remaining brain cells fighting for third place desperately tries to work out where the noise came from. Originally, this was a clever mechanic, a subtle, non-lethal way to manipulate attention and gain a slight advantage. But at the moment we realised it works every single time, it became less of a tool to tilt the balance in our favour and more an abusive trademark. There's always been an inconvenient hurdle developers have faced when implementing this mechanic. You could be trapped in a room that is overflowing with objects that are ostensibly fit for purpose, yet only a tiny handful of them are actually interactable. The reasons behind this are likely related to collision limits, sound rules, or even just general gameplay balancing, but it still creates this bizarre moment of contention where you want to grab literally anything to create a distraction, and apparently nothing around you qualifies.
Yeah, okay, so concessions, disbelief, video game logic, I get it, but this feels like it's pushing beyond the limits of familiarity and well within the realms of design complacency. Now, we could cut developers some slack. I mean, these games aren't designed to be stress tested by the average player.
Each aspect of stealth would ideally result in the player encountering a situation, using the tool or intended tactic effectively, and simply moving on. But after hours of exposure, we're going to find exploits, we're going to find imperfections, whether it be intentional or not. And when we factor in the constant replication of successful systems across multiple titles, what we end up with is these issues becoming compounded to a point where we reach industry stagnation. Devotees of this channel may be familiar with my thoughts on this matter. By the way, if you feel compelled to jump to the defense of the games I've showcased or even the other titles that I've failed to mention, then I assure you there's no need. I can fully appreciate that making games is a long and difficult process, and it would be naive to assume that these studios aren't at least weighing up the design choices that generate the highest revenue. But this unfortunately has led us down a path where stealth doesn't really seem to be evolving. Many of the big hitters are, at least as far as we can tell, either retired, exiled, AWOL, or perhaps somewhere in between. It might sound harsh, but what we appear to have is a somewhat generic template of stealth, a one-size-fits-all, flat-pack solution. By no means awful, certainly not broken, but just interchangeable. And that's fine until every game is doing the exact same thing in the exact same way. At some point, stealth stopped feeling like a design pillar and more like a checkbox. Something simply inserted, no longer crafted. We only seem to be seeing systems that feel standard, boilerplate, not innovative. So where does that leave us?
Well, probably with more questions than answers. At the moment, all we can do is sit and wait. Eventually, we'll hear something off in the distance. Something just out of sight. Something quietly moving through the industry's blind spots.
If the rumours are true, maybe the person preparing to break that silence is the same mind who once turned a cardboard box into the most iconic stealth tool in video game history. Maybe stealth hasn't reached a dead end. Maybe it's just waiting for someone bold enough to strike.